The mist curled around the Appalachian ridges like a living thing, thickening with each mile I drove deeper into the hollers. The air had that damp, rotten sweet smell that clung to pine and decay, a scent that promised isolation and whispered old secrets. My truck's tires gripped the muddy back road with difficulty, each bump and rutted depression making me wonder why I'd thought this trip was a good idea. It had started as a curiosity. A friend had mentioned an abandoned settlement in the northern reaches of the Appalachian Mountains, a place locals only referred to as Hollow Creek. Everyone who spoke of it did so quietly, almost in fear of the name itself. The sign at the intersection was weathered and barely legible. Hollow Creek, 12 miles. There was no traffic, no hum of civilization, just the trees leaning together, dark and ominous. I shifted the truck into four-wheel drive. I had a small backpack with water, a flashlight, and my camera. I told myself it was going to be a simple exploration, maybe some photographs of forgotten homes and empty streets. But as the sun dropped behind the ridges, spilling its last red light over the mountains, the landscape began to feel alive, as if it were watching. I passed the first cabin about 5 miles in. Its wood had rotted almost entirely, the roof sagging under the weight of time and moss. Broken windows glared like black eyes. A chill ran through me. Something didn't feel right. Not the usual spookiness of abandoned places, but a palpable tension, like the air itself was thick with expectation. I shook it off, telling myself it was just imagination. The road twisted further, narrower, trees pressing so close to the dirt path that branches clawed at my truck. Around 7 miles in, I noticed something strange. Smoke. Thin, curling wisps rising in the distance. It didn't seem like a fire from any house. There was no chimney. I turned off the engine and listened. Nothing. Just the distant rustle of leaves, the occasional snap of a branch. I considered turning back, but curiosity rooted me to the spot. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped into the mud. The smoke led me to a clearing, or what must have once been a clearing. Now it was overgrown with brambles and fallen trees, but in the center stood a cabin, far more intact than the others I had seen. Smoke rose from its stone chimney, and faint orange light flickered through the cracks in the shutters. I called out, hesitant, "Hello?" My voice was swallowed by the forest, no response. I approached the cabin, the ground soft beneath my boots. The closer I got, the more I felt a heaviness pressing down on me, like the air itself was laden with warning. Then I saw it. Carved into the tree next to the cabin was a symbol, circular, jagged, almost like a sun, but twisted and asymmetrical. The edges were blackened, as if burned. I stepped back instinctively. This wasn't ordinary folk art. It had an intent, a malice. But the light, warm, inviting, still spilled from the cabin, and I felt drawn foolishly toward it. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it, and the hinges groaned in protest. Inside, the room was dimly lit by a hearth. The furniture was rough-hewn, the kind you could imagine settlers crafting hundreds of years ago. But there were signs of recent habitation. A kettle with steam curling from its spout, a pair of worn boots at the threshold, a small wooden bowl with partially eaten food. A pungent, iron-like smell hung in the air. I realized my stomach tightened. Blood. Not fresh, but recent. Coppery. I swallowed hard and tried to focus, telling myself it could be anything. Then I heard it. A soft scraping like fingernails on wood coming from the corner of the room. My flashlight trembled in my hand as I turned it toward the sound. A figure hunched over a table, its back to me. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, as if it were struggling against something invisible. The closer I looked, the more I noticed its skin, sallow, stretched, almost translucent. Its hair hung in wet, matted strands, and the sound it made wasn't breathing. It was whispering, words I couldn't comprehend. Then it turned slowly, and I saw its face. There were no eyes, just hollow pits, black and deep, and a mouth too wide, stretching unnaturally, lined with teeth that glimmered in the dim light. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my feet refused. I felt the air thicken around me, heavy and wet. The creature, no human, stood and tilted its head unnervingly. Then it spoke in a low, guttural whisper, "You shouldn't have come." And as it moved, its limbs bent at wrong angles, the floorboards groaning under its weight. Panic surged, and I bolted, crashing out the door. I didn't look back until I reached the truck. But when I did, the cabin was gone. Nothing but forest, twisted trees, and the lingering smell of iron. I drove in a blind panic, the road narrowing, mud sucking at my tires. Then I saw them, figures at the edge of the trees, shadows, hunched, staring. I couldn't tell if they were human or something else. Their heads moved in unison as I passed, watching, following. I floored the gas, but the road seemed endless, folding in on itself. I began to notice other things. The trees were wrong. Their branches stretched like limbs, writhing just slightly when I wasn't looking directly at them. Shapes moved in the corner of my vision. I could hear whispers through the truck, like hundreds of voices speaking at once, echoing from the hills. Hours, or was it minutes, passed, the sky above me turning an oppressive gray even though it should have been night. Eventually I reached a clearing with a sign, "Welcome to Hollow Creek." The letters were new, freshly painted, almost mocking in their normalcy. But behind the sign, the landscape was no longer familiar, Appalachian woods. The hills had shifted, twisted. A village lay spread before me, houses like the one I had seen, all inhabited. Smoke rose from chimneys and figures moved in the distance. But when I blinked, the village shrank, contracted, became a miniature model. The figures were crawling over the houses, tiny, malformed, reaching toward me. My mind screamed. I turned the truck around, but the road behind me was gone. Trees crowded in, leaning closer, their branches like fingers. I could hear them whispering now, their voices merging with the wind. "You shouldn't have come. Stay, stay, stay." The truck died. I tried to restart it, but the engine would not turn. My flashlight flickered and went out, leaving me in absolute darkness. Then I felt it. Hands. Hundreds of small, cold, rough hands crawling over the hood, the roof, my legs. They tugged at me, pulling me toward the forest. I screamed, the sound raw and hoarse, but the darkness seemed to swallow it. Then a figure appeared at the edge of the truck's windshield. A woman, or something that resembled one. Her face was distorted, melted almost, her eyes dripping black. Her lips stretched impossibly wide in a grin. She whispered my name, perfectly, softly, intimately, and I realized I had never told anyone I was coming here. Only I knew my name. Only she could have said it. My blood ran cold. I fought, kicking and clawing, but the hands only multiplied. The branches of the surrounding trees bent down to meet me, and in that moment I understood. Hollow Creek didn't want visitors. It never had. This place existed outside of the normal world, feeding on curiosity, fear, and flesh. My heart hammered in my chest as I felt myself being dragged out of the truck, into the mud, into the shadows. I saw the figures in the village move closer, their mouths opening unnaturally, voices joining the chorus. Stay. Stay forever. Stay. Pain shot through me as I hit the ground and everything went black. When I woke, it was daylight, or what should have been daylight. The sky was gray, oppressive. I was lying on a muddy road, miles from the truck, which was gone. No tire tracks, no sign that I had ever been here. The forest seemed normal, deceptively peaceful. My backpack was intact, my flashlight dead, my water bottle full. I stumbled down the road, desperate to find civilization. When I finally reached the nearest town, the locals looked at me as though I were a ghost. One old man muttered under his breath, "Hollow Creek takes what it wants. Ain't no coming back." I tried to explain, but the words sounded absurd, even to me. Nobody had heard of Hollow Creek. Maps showed nothing but unbroken forest. And yet I could still hear it in the quiet moments at night when the wind shifted just so. Whispers of my name, a soft pleading, come back, stay, stay." I moved towns, changed jobs, avoided the woods entirely. But sometimes in the dark, I dream of the cabin, of the woman, of the hands. And sometimes I wake to find small scratches on my arms, wet mud on my doorstep, and the faint smell of iron in the air. I know that Hollow Creek is out there, waiting, and it will not forget me. One day, it will come for me again, and when it does, there will be no truck, no road, no escape, only the hollow, whispering shadows claiming another soul. Story the end. The mountains had been quiet for decades. The kind of quiet that presses against your eardrums and makes you second-guess every rustle of leaves. Folks in Harlan County spoke little of the old woods behind Mason Hollow, where the trees grew thick and the soil seemed darker than anywhere else. Old-timers said the land held grudges, whispered of children who vanished and never returned, of dogs that ran off and came back years later with their eyes white and vacant. I never believed it, until the summer I turned 18 and my curiosity pulled me into the hollow itself. I was staying with my Uncle Roy that year. a man who'd grown up in the Hollow and moved to Knoxville to escape the ghosts he wouldn't name. Uncle Roy's cabin sat near the edge of the ridge, half falling apart, with a sagging porch and a roof that leaked in more places than it didn't. The forest pressed up to the yard, so close it seemed like the trees themselves leaned in to watch. He warned me to stay out of the hollow, claiming it wasn't safe, but his warnings had always sounded like stories meant to scare a boy. I thought it was just superstition. The first night, I heard it, a scratching at the cabin door. I figured it was a raccoon or a possum. When I opened it, nothing was there. Only the night and the sharp, cold wind, and a faint smell of rot that made my stomach twist. The next night, it came again. This time, it wasn't at the door. It was outside my window, slow, deliberate, like claws scraping on the boards. My uncle was asleep, snoring, and I didn't wake him. I just pulled the covers over my head and pretended it wasn't there. By the third night, I started seeing shapes moving between the trees. At first, I convinced myself they were deer or bears, but they moved too silently, too deliberately. Their shapes were tall, twisted, sometimes seeming to lean or bend in ways no human could. The shadows flickered at the edges of the trees, and whenever I tried to focus, they disappeared. I asked Uncle Roy about it, and for the first time, he looked truly uneasy. He wouldn't tell me outright, only muttered that Mason Hollow held a kind of sickness. Something had lived there long before the county was settled, something that didn't belong to our world. It watches, boy, he said. It learns. It waits. And when it wants, it'll take. I laughed it off, though my voice trembled. The rational part of me refused to believe in monsters. But that same night, I woke to screaming. At first, I thought it was my uncle. He didn't scream. But the sound was wrong. It was high-pitched, frantic, and impossibly loud for the empty forest. I ran outside in the dark, barefoot, tripping over roots and rocks. The screams came from the hollow itself. I couldn't see anything, just the darkness and the echoes bouncing between the trees. When I went to tell my uncle in the morning, he didn't seem surprised. He only shook his head, grim. "That's one of the lost," he said. "Always screaming, always running, never finding home." The day was stifling, the kind of heat that made the air shimmer over the ridges. I spent it wandering near the edge of the hollow, trying to see what could be making the sounds. That's when I found the first body. I don't know how I didn't see it earlier. It was lying half buried under a tangle of roots and brambles, its eyes wide open, its skin pale and cold. The smell hit me last, thick and sour, like iron and decay. My stomach flipped and I stumbled back, tripping over a rock and hitting the ground hard. When I looked up, the trees seemed to lean closer, the shadows deeper. Something moved just at the edge of my vision. I ran back to the cabin and didn't sleep for 3 nights. On the 4th, I couldn't resist. I had to know what was in the hollow. I told my uncle I was going for a hike, though he didn't try to stop me this time. "Don't go too far," he warned, his voice tight. I followed the old trail, the one that twisted through the densest part of the hollow. It was barely a path at all, just a series of depressions in the dirt and smashed underbrush. The deeper I went, the colder it got. The trees blocked the sun completely, though the sky was clear. Shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally, and I started hearing whispers. At first they were so faint I thought it was the wind, but the whispers grew clearer, urgent, almost pleading. "Come, stay, join us." I froze. The air tasted metallic. I could feel movement in the shadows, circling me, and my heart hammered in my chest. I turned to run, and that's when I saw it. A figure, pale and elongated, its limbs too long, its head tilting at an impossible angle. Its eyes were dark hollows. Its mouth moved, but no sound came out. I stumbled back, falling into a root, and when I looked up, there were more. A dozen of them, all staring, moving silently, circling closer. I ran blindly, branches scratching my face, roots tripping me, until I reached a clearing. And in the clearing was the house. Not my uncle's cabin, not anything I had seen on maps, just a crumbling, blackened house that reeked of rot. The door hung crooked on its hinges, and inside, shadows pooled like liquid. I wanted to turn away, but my feet carried me forward. Inside, the air was thick and warm, humid like a tomb. The walls were covered with scratches, deep gouges in the wood that looked like claws or nails. On the floor, there were shapes, bodies, stacked like firewood. Some were half-rotted, some fresh, all grotesque. and in the center a figure crouched, its back to me, whispering to itself, rocking slightly. It turned its head slowly. Its face was my uncle's, or maybe it wasn't. I couldn't tell because it split open from chin to forehead in a wide grin, revealing rows of teeth like broken glass. I ran, out the back, into the forest, crashing through underbrush until I didn't know where I was anymore. The whispers followed me, carried on the wind, and I could hear footsteps behind me, though nothing ever touched the ground. Hours, maybe days, passed. I lost track. Hunger and thirst gnawed at me, but I couldn't stop moving. I stumbled into a small stream, drank the water, and for a moment felt relief. But the reflection in the water wasn't mine. My face was pale, my eyes blackened, my lips stretched in a silent scream. I recoiled, and when I looked up, something was watching me from the opposite bank. Tall, impossibly thin, its head jerking in unnatural angles, smiling. I fled again until the hollow spat me out near the edge of the ridge. My uncle's cabin was gone. No trees, no trail, nothing familiar. Only the mountain and the endless dark. I walked for hours until I found a road and then a truck. I flagged it down and rode to town, shaking, silent. The driver asked if I was okay. I couldn't speak. The town felt wrong, sterile, unreal, like stepping into someone else's life. I never went back to Harlan County. I never spoke of what I saw. But at night, I hear the whispers in my apartment, feel the weight of eyes on me, and sometimes I wake to find long scratches across my walls, fresh, jagged, impossible. I've never been able to tell if it's in my head or if they followed me, and when I see a shadow moving just at the corner of my vision, I know they are still there, learning, watching, waiting. Some nights I dream of the hollow, of the blackened house, of my uncle's grinning face, and in those dreams I hear the softest, most insistent voice, like breath on my neck, whispering, "Join us. Stay. Forever. The mountains don't forget. They don't forgive." And Mason Hollow, it always takes. Story the end. The wind had been picking up all afternoon, carrying with it a bitter chill that cut through the layers of clothing like a knife. The trees along the narrow mountain road creaked and groaned, their skeletal branches scraping together, creating a sound that made even seasoned locals pause. Jerry Landers tightened his grip on the steering wheel, trying to ignore the shiver running up his spine. He knew every mile of these back roads, but something about today felt wrong. It was that kind of wrong that makes your gut knot, even when there's no logical reason. He had come up from Knoxville to check on his uncle's cabin, old, abandoned, and on the far side of Hollow Creek. The place had been in the family for generations, but no one had lived there for decades. Rumors had circulated about the cabin for years, mostly whispered at the diner in town. Strange sounds in the woods at night, missing hikers, and once a man found wandering near the creek, his clothes torn and eyes hollow. Most folks shrugged it off as just mountain superstition, but Jerry, being family, felt obliged to see for himself. By the time he reached the small gravel path that led to the cabin, darkness had fully settled over the valley. The moon was hidden behind a thick layer of clouds, leaving him with only the headlights cutting narrow tunnels through the night. Every shadow seemed alive, twisting unnaturally as he drove deeper into the forest. The cabin came into view like an apparition. Its weathered wood had turned gray with age, and the roof sagged in the middle. Jerry felt a flash of unease when he saw the door hanging slightly ajar, though he was sure he had locked it the last time he visited. The wind moaned through the broken windows, carrying with it a smell of damp earth and something decayed. He stepped out of the truck, boots crunching on the frost-hardened leaves, and tried to shake off the feeling. Inside, the cabin was just as he remembered it, if not worse. Dust coated every surface, and cobwebs draped the corners like veils. The fireplace was cold, the hearth filled with ash that hadn't been disturbed in decades. Yet something didn't sit right. A faint, rhythmic tapping echoed from the back room, soft but insistent. He froze. "Hello?" His voice sounded tinny, swallowed by the heavy air. No answer. He moved cautiously toward the back, the floorboards groaning under his weight. The tapping stopped abruptly. A cold draft brushed his neck, making the hairs on his arms stand on end. Jerry's heart hammered, but he pressed on, convinced it was just a loose shutter banging in the wind. When he opened the door, the back room was empty, except for the wall. Someone or something had scratched words into the wood. "We see you." Jerry staggered back, nearly tripping over a chair. The writing was fresh. No, fresher than anything left to rot in an abandoned cabin should be. He spun around, chest tight, convinced someone was behind him. But the room was empty. He fled back to the truck, fumbling with the keys as the sense of being watched grew unbearable. When he finally started the engine, the headlights illuminated movement among the trees. Shadows shifted unnaturally, too large and too quick for deer. The movement seemed to follow him as he drove down the gravel path, and Jerry's stomach turned cold. The road ahead narrowed sharply, and a fog began to settle, thick, white, and choking. He slowed, peering through the mist, and then he saw it, a figure standing in the middle of the road. It was tall, impossibly thin, with long, twisted limbs. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and even from this distance, Jerry could see its eyes reflecting the headlights. They weren't human eyes. They were black, infinite, like two pits carved from shadow. Jerry slammed on the brakes, but the truck skidded on the frost, spinning toward the edge of the ditch. When he looked again, the figure was gone. He tried to convince himself it had been a trick of the fog, his mind playing cruel games. But deep down, he knew better. He didn't stop driving until he reached the old Hollow Creek Bridge. There, the truck jerked violently as if something had slammed into it from the side. Heart racing, Jerry jumped out, shining the flashlight over the icy planks. Nothing, just the creek running black and slow beneath him. Then the sound started, the whispering. At first, it was just on the wind, barely audible, like children calling from far away. Then it grew louder, urgent and angry, echoing off the mountainside. Leave or join, join, join. Jerry spun around, the beam of the flashlight catching something on the far side of the creek. Figures, dozens of them, cloaked in tattered clothing, their faces obscured, standing motionless on the rocks, staring. Their eyes glinted in the dim light. He could feel their attention, like a physical weight pressing on him, and he stumbled backward, tripping into the truck bed. He started the engine again, fumbling through the gears. As he peeled out onto the road, he caught movement in the rearview mirror. Shadows crawling along the road behind him, too fast, too coordinated. And then he saw it. A man, or what used to be a man, lying across the road. At first, Jerry thought it was a body, but as he approached, the figure sat up. Its face was a grotesque mask of stretched flesh and hollow eyes, grinning in a way that should have been impossible. Jerry swerved violently, the truck fishtailing, and plummeted down the embankment. The vehicle rolled, smashing into the trees. When he came to, he was dazed, his chest aching. The truck was a twisted wreck, yet he could hear the whispers again, closer this time. Clambering out, he realized he wasn't alone. Figures emerged from the fog, slowly, deliberately. Some were humanoid, others were monstrous, shapes bending in ways that defied natural anatomy. They didn't run. They didn't scream. They just advanced. One stepped closer and whispered his name. The sound was like fingernails on glass, inside his head, everywhere at once. "Jerry, join us." He ran, crashing through underbrush, branches tearing at his clothes and skin. The sounds followed him, the whispers, the laughter, the scraping of claws against tree trunks. Every few seconds he would glance back, and the figures were always just there at the edge of visibility, sliding in and out of the fog. Hours, or maybe minutes, passed. Time seemed meaningless. He stumbled into an old mine shaft, the entrance hidden by brush. Desperate, he crawled inside, the darkness swallowing him. The air smelled of rot and earth, damp and suffocating. For a while he thought he was safe. Then the mine whispered, not voices this time, something deeper. A vibration through the rock, low and resonant. The walls themselves seemed alive, pulsing. Shapes formed in the shadows, hands pressed against stone, reaching. Jerry screamed, but it was swallowed by the darkness. He ran blindly, the tunnels twisting impossibly, leading him deeper into the mountain. Finally, he emerged into a cavern larger than he could have imagined. The ceiling disappeared into darkness, and the floor was littered with the remnants of those who had come before. Twisted bones, torn clothing, and objects that defied explanation. In the center was a fire, black smoke curling upward without flame, and around it figures danced, chanting in a language Jerry had never heard, but felt deep in his bones. He tried to retreat, but the exit had vanished. The shadows converged, murmuring, singing, calling. And then he saw them. His uncle, or what remained of him, hunched and hollow-eyed, moving with the rhythm of the dark dance. His mouth opened and a scream poured out, but it was not his uncle's voice. It was the mountain's voice. Jerry stumbled backward, heart racing, and tripped over something soft. A small child, or what looked like a child, grabbed his ankle. Its eyes were empty, black as the night outside, and it smiled. Jerry screamed, and the sound seemed to multiply, filling the cavern with echoes of terror. The figures closed in, whispering in unison, calling him to join the dance, to give in to the mountain. He ran, again and again, each path leading him deeper, the mind labyrinthine and impossible. Every turn brought faces from his past, distorted and grinning, whispering promises and threats. Eventually, Jerry collapsed. His lungs burned, his legs gave way. He could feel the figures surrounding him, the darkness pressing against his chest. One leaned close, a face stretched and unhuman, and whispered directly into his ear, "You can't leave. You never leave." The last thing he saw was the black fire, the chanting, and the eyes all around him, infinite and empty. Weeks later, hikers found his truck on the gravel road near Hollow Creek, empty. No sign of Jerry. Locals whispered again, but nothing was ever written down, because to speak it aloud might summon the mountain's shadow closer. Some say when the fog rolls down from the mountains and the wind moans through the trees, you can hear him screaming. Not a normal scream, but one that echoes in your bones, calling you to the dark dance beneath the hollow hills, where the mountain never forgets and never forgives. Story the end. The sun dipped behind the ridges long before we reached the old cabin in the woods, but we kept driving anyway. The eastern slope of the Appalachian chain swallowed the daylight quickly. Shadowed hollows with trees clawing the sky and creeks full of whispered regrets. We arrived after dark. Rain pounded against the windshield, and the forest loomed like something restlessly breathing just behind the glass. My friend Carter had been insistent. "We'll stay just one night up there," he said. "Nothing crazy, just the cabin my grandfather left us." He had found the property in a will, tucked away off an unlabeled dirt track that wound upward into the mountains of West Virginia. The sign was weather-rotted, and we passed it the first time. Then we nearly bogged down in mud, turned around, found another route, and finally the headlights caught the outline of a small log cabin, shrouded in darkness, perched on the steep slope like some old sentinel guarding the ridge. "Here it is," Carter exhaled, shutting off his truck engine. The world fell silent. No traffic, no hum of electricity, nothing but the slow drip of rain from pine needles and the distant echo of an owl. The porch light flickered. A single bulb, and inside we saw the cabin's door standing open. He hadn't locked it, which struck me odd. I followed him in. The interior smelled of decay, damp wood, and something else, old leather and copper, like something once alive. He flipped on the light, weak filament lamp, and small motes drifted in the air. The room had a stone fireplace, a sagging sofa, a coffee table scarred with burn marks, and heavy curtains drawn across the windows. Rain tapped the roof in an irregular rhythm. We set our bags down. "You good?" I asked. "Yeah," he said, his voice low. "My grandfather, he used to come up here when things got rough. He said the woods talk." I nodded, though I didn't know what to say. Carter's grandfather had been a rough man, crusty, tired, the type who told stories in moonlight about old family curses, coal mines gone wrong, and hollers where light didn't reach. We knew we should leave in the morning. That was the plan. But late that night, I couldn't sleep. Something in the house stirred. I heard a scraping upstairs. I opened my eyes and sat up. Carter snored slightly, lying next to me on the old bed that creaked beneath his weight. The walls groaned with the wind, or perhaps with something else. I tiptoed out into the hallway. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, lighting the narrow hall to the attic door. It was closed. I heard the scrape again, soft like fingernails on wood. My heart lodged in my chest. I thought it might be an animal in the attic. That would make sense. I grabbed a flashlight we'd brought. I slid open the attic door. The stairs looked steep and worn. I climbed, each step cracking under me. At the top, I shone the light around. Profiles of boxes, old trunks, and in the far corner, a rocking chair facing the wall. The chair moved slowly, its rhythm measured. One back, two forward, one back. No one sitting in it. Something whispered, a soft click, then the chair stopped. I held my breath. The rain on the roof escalated, then died. Outside the window, the world seemed paused. Then I heard it, an exhaled breath, low and guttural coming from the shadows. Who's there? My voice trembled. A pair of pale eyes reflected the flashlight's beam. Then they vanished. I turned, stumbled down the stairs, and nearly tumbled. The door at the bottom slammed shut behind me. A wave of cold hit me. I shook myself and raced back into the bedroom. Carter stirred. "What the hell?" he muttered. "There's something in the attic," I said. He sat up sharply, then rubbed his eyes. "It's an old cabin. Things settle. Might have been a raccoon." I looked at him. He didn't look convincing. He didn't look safe. The next morning, the rain had stopped. Fog hugged the ground. We made coffee and walked outside to stretch. The forest was heavy, wet with recent rain, and smelled of moss and rotten leaves. The trees still dripped. Sunlight weakly filtered through the canopy. We discovered a path. It looked improvised, maybe used decades ago. It wound away from the cabin into a grove of birch trees, where the ground sloped steeply down to a ravine. I asked Carter what it was. "An old trail," he said. "Grandpa called it the Walk. He said it carried the spirits of the past." I nodded. He seemed willing to talk about more now that daylight came. He said his grandfather told him about miners who dug too greedily, about families who vanished into the hollows, and about the woods reclaiming them. "There's a mark on one of the trees," he said. "If you follow the walk far enough, you'll see an X. Don't cross that." I chuckled. Way to build mystery. He stared at me. "It's not a story." We followed the path for about 15 minutes, branches brushing our shoulders. The forest deepened, grew darker. The trail ended at a big oak with a deep scar in its bark. Rick red, blood-colored. Next to it, carved by hand maybe long ago, an X. A shiver ran down my spine. "Let's go back," I said, but Carter moved closer to the tree. "Look here." He pointed at a metal plate hammered into the trunk. It read a name, Elizabeth Harper, 1923 to 1947. Below it, "Gone from the holler." His voice sounded distant. I didn't want to touch the plate. I felt the air drop 5 degrees. Suddenly we heard a voice behind us. A woman's whisper, so soft I almost thought the wind spoke. "Help me." We spun around. No one, just fog and whispering branches. I reached for Carter's arm. He didn't answer. "Did you hear that?" I asked. He nodded, pale. "Let's go." We retraced the path fast. The forest seemed alive. Trees bent slightly like spectators leaning in. The fog thickened. The cabin porch was blurred in the distance. And then I noticed we were not alone. Something followed us. A silhouette between trees, tall and ragged. It paused when we saw it, then merged with the fog. By the time we reached the cabin, we didn't speak. The interior light looked too dim, too lonely. I locked the door behind us and slid the bolt home. That night, nothing major happened at first. But I couldn't sleep again. The house felt wrong. The ceiling beams creaked overhead and the wind rattled the windows. I woke to a scratching. Not the attic this time, somewhere beneath. I heard it as a rhythm. Scrape, scrape, pause, scrape. My mind screamed, "Get out," but my body stayed. I nudged Carter. "Listen." He frowned. "What?" "Under the house." He swung his feet over. Maybe the foundation shifted. I didn't believe that. We got flashlights and went outside around the side of the cabin. I crouched by the stone foundation, a small crawl-space door. I eased it open. Darkness. I shone the light in. A small crawl-space, dirt floor, roots dangling. Then I saw footprints in the mud, wet, fresh. They headed under the cabin toward the back. 2 bare prints, then 3, then 4. They ended abruptly. "No way," I whispered. Carter grabbed my arm. "We're leaving at first light. No question." Morning came slowly. The fog clung even at dawn. I packed my bag in silence. Carter sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his phone, though we had no reception. "Got signal now?" I asked. He shook his head. We stepped outside. My boots sank in soggy moss. The air was still, heavy. I sensed movement in the trees, something watching. We didn't follow the walk again. Instead, we drove as fast as possible down the dirt track. The truck's tires skidded a little in the mud. At the screen of my passenger side, the border guard station of the old logging road passed behind us. It seemed abandoned, decades. I let out my breath only when the last ridge fell away and we could see the broad valley open. I thought I was done with it. But that evening, back in our apartment, I found something on my phone. A photo I didn't remember taking. It showed the tree with the X, the oak. But beside the plate, it showed a figure. A woman in a white dress, tall, blood-stained, face blurred. I stared. I didn't show it to Carter yet. Then came the phone call. "Save me." That was the message from an unknown number. No voice, just text. We decided to go back the next day. I know that sounds reckless, but Carter insisted the figure might be his grandmother or something his grandfather tried to warn about. He believed the spirits there might need acknowledgement. I wasn't so sure. My skin felt tighter. I slept poorly. But I went. When we reached the cabin again, the forest seemed grayer. The porch light flickered as the wind gusted. We unlocked the door. The house stank of stale rain and decay again. But the attic door was wide open this time. The chair was gone. "Great," Carter muttered. He searched the attic. No chair. But he found a trunk. He pried it open. Inside, daughter-sized clothes from the 1940s, brittle letters, a black and white photograph of a young woman, Elizabeth Harper. The same name from the tree. Her eyes stared at us. I held a letter. Open quote, "I cannot stay in the holler anymore. They are coming for me. Forgive me." Close quote. The handwriting shaky. The date, June 3rd, 1947. "What do you think happened?" I asked. Carter closed the trunk. He stood up and took a deep breath. Grandpa told me about something buried under the house. When the miners left the area, they left more than debris. They left blood. We paced the cabin. The windows looked like dark eyes in the walls. Outside, the fog drifted by. I felt that unnatural cold again. I heard an eave creak. A chill breathed past me. I spun. Nothing. We returned to the crawl space. I shone the light down. Those footprints were gone with the rain. But I saw something glinting in the dirt. A watch, pocket size, tarnished brass. I picked it up. The seconds hand moved. It ticked. But the watch was dated 1946. The glass cracked. On its back, E.H. "Elizabeth Harper," I whispered. That night we stayed again. We unlatched the windows so faint moonlight slipped in and cast long shadows. Carter slept. I tried but couldn't. I imagined the woman in the photo coming back. I heard whispering in the walls. "Here. Help. Join." At around 3 a.m., I awoke to something slamming in the hall. A door, a bedroom door upstairs, shut hard. I froze. Carter slept. I crept out of bed, flashlight in hand. I went to the door. It didn't have a knob. It was a boarded-up room. The boards were split. I pried one plank back. Light from the hallway filtered in. I peered. Inside, I saw her. The woman in the photo stood near the far corner. Her dress white but stained, her hair tangled, a hollow in one eye socket. She raised her arm and pointed at me. Not with the hand, but the end of her sleeve flicking. Then she tilted her head, letting out a groan like a wind through a dead tree. I gasped. She turned and vanished into the wall. I stepped back. The door slammed open and a gust blew through the hall, extinguishing the flashlight. I heard shuffling, a low moan. The temperature dropped so fast my breath fogged in the beam of the now extinguished flashlight. I scrambled back to the bed, dived beneath the covers. Carter woke up. "Get up. We're leaving right now." He pulled on jeans, grabbed the watch. We fled outside in the dark forest, rain again beginning. We ran to the truck. In the rearview mirror, I glimpsed her at the cabin window, just a silhouette, peering. Then she disappeared. On the drive down, heavy rain, mud, sliding wheels, headlights cutting through fog. We arrived at the valley, light traffic, normalcy returned. But something in me had changed. Back at my home, I kept the watch. It ticked occasionally, but often stopped. At night, I heard whispers, "Join us." I woke with scratches on my wrist, thin, fresh lines I couldn't explain. Carter got nightmares, screaming in his sleep about coal dust and screams in the dark. Then I found another photo in the packet from the trunk. It showed the cabin, and in the corner of the frame halfway up the hillside, I saw something. Many small crosses, dozens of them, half buried, half hidden among the trees. I handed it to Carter. He ignored it at first, then looked closely until his eyes widened. "We never walked all of the walk," he said. "We never found the end." We decided one last time we'd go back and finish it. I know, the rational side of me shouted, "No, you're insane," but the other part wanted answers. We arrived at the ridge again, heavy with storm clouds, the path slick. I brought a shovel. We followed the walk to the tree with the X again. It sank. From there we followed downhill into a narrow ravine. The ground yielded under our boots. At the bottom was a shallow pit, churned earth, logs placed crosswise. We shone flashlights. Bodies? No. Bones. Many. White. Brittle. Small and large. A child's skull, a man's femur. We both retched. The pit was surrounded by the crosses, hand-carved sticks, each one numbered. Most lost their paint. One read number 47, Elizabeth H. The bodies looked freshly exposed, but the rain evidently had washed away the covering. Then from uphill we heard chanting. Soft, at first barely audible, Then louder, not human voices. Something rasped and elongated. We turned upward. In the gloom of the forest, we saw figures moving, pale limbs, white dresses, ragged clothing gathering at the rim of the ravine. Thousands of them, or at least dozens, perhaps more, standing between trees, faces blank, flickering in torchlight we could not see but felt. The chant grew, one low note rising, echoing in the trees. The fog rolled in. We wanted to run. We did. The ground erupted beneath our feet, roots twisting, and one of the figures dropped down the slope. It moved like a puppet with broken strings. Carter stumbled and dropped his shovel. I reached for him. Go, go, go! He didn't respond. Something grabbed his ankle. I dragged him. We tumbled up the ravine side, slipping, roots scratching our arms, rain pounding our faces. A scream behind us, his scream, and the forest swallowed it. We reached the trail, ran until the cabin was just a memory. We didn't look back. The truck wouldn't start on the first turn, then the second. Finally, it coughed, alive. As we left the forest, we saw the cabin's light turn on for an instant, then go out. The hills behind us shook with a deep moan. Back in civilization, days passed. Carter wouldn't talk about what took him. He had a gash on his leg that refused to heal. The smell of damp wood lingered in his clothes, his eyes haunted. I kept the watch, kept the photo, kept the nightmares. The voices came at night. I'd wake and see that dress in the hall. I'd slip into the bathroom and smear the watch with water. It would tick again. Then I got a call. From my house, the old number I'd never given. A voice, deep and cracked. You left the crosses. Now they come. The basement door creaked open while I was showering. I heard a thud in the darkness. I flicked the light on. The watch lay on the floor, open, screaming tick-tock. And next to it a small child's handprint in the dust, blood red. I packed a bag. I left town. I left phones behind. I moved to the low plains of Georgia, far from hills. But even here, in broad daylight, I see shadows among pines. I smell damp wood when a storm approaches. I feel the whisper at the window. Join us. And sometimes I open the watch and it ticks again, measuring the seconds until the next scream. In my dreams, I'm back on the ridge, the trees above bent over me, the mist thickening, figures rising from the pit, their arms reaching out. I realize now, the hills don't forget, the woods remember, and we awaken something ancient. The holler asked for a reckoning. Story the end. The mountains of eastern Kentucky held secrets the world refused to acknowledge. They twisted and rose like the gnarled fingers of some long-forgotten god, shrouded in fog that never fully lifted. Anyone who grew up there knew the stories, the warnings whispered at night in the creaking cabins along the hollers. Still, most dismissed them as old superstition until you saw it for yourself. I moved into a rickety house outside of Whitesburg one late October, drawn by the cheap rent and the quiet. The cabin was small and crooked, sitting on a rise that overlooked a tangle of trees so thick the sunlight barely touched the soil. Locals avoided the road near it, muttering about bad blood in the hills. I didn't care. I was used to isolation. I thought of it as peace. The first night, I heard the dogs. They came howling from somewhere deep in the hollow, a chorus of mournful, agonized yelps. They didn't sound like normal dogs, though. Something in their cries carried a human edge, like someone screaming through fur. I pressed my face against the window, staring into the inky blackness. No one was there. I went back to bed, telling myself it was just coyotes. Days passed. The hollow seemed alive, watching. The trees shifted unnaturally when I wasn't looking directly at them, and the wind carried whispers in a dialect I couldn't place, soft guttural murmurs that sometimes called my name. I shrugged it off, blaming it on the isolation. The trouble began when I found the shack. It was tucked under a stand of oaks, moss-covered and half swallowed by the earth. Smoke curled lazily from its chimney, though no path led there. I never saw anyone inside, but at night, flickers of light moved behind its cracked windows. I was drawn to it, heart hammering. Part of me wanted to knock, part of me knew I shouldn't. I did anyway. No one answered. The door creaked open under my hand. Inside, the smell hit me first, iron and rot. The walls were lined with jars, hundreds of them, filled with murky liquid. Inside each floated a small thing, pale and curled, suspended like insects in amber. My stomach churned. Some were mice, others frogs, but others I couldn't tell. Faces, maybe? Limbs? I didn't dare look too closely. The floor groaned beneath me. A rocking chair moved on its own in the corner. I stepped back, tripping over a coil of rope, and then I saw it, the table. On it lay a human hand, the skin stretched tight, nails grown long and yellow. A crude carving was etched into its palm. A symbol I didn't recognize, but it hummed in the air, a vibration that pressed into my chest. I stumbled back and ran, the hollow laughing behind me in a way that was unmistakably alive. I didn't sleep that night. Shadows moved in the corners of my room, stretching and twisting toward me. The whispers became voices, murmuring just beyond comprehension, promising things I didn't want and threatening things I couldn't yet imagine. The next day, I confronted the locals at the general store, hoping for some rational explanation. They eyed me warily. An old man with a crooked spine and tobacco-stained teeth finally spoke. "You seen it then?" he rasped. "The Hollow Keeper don't take kindly to strangers." "I don't know what you're talking about," I said. His eyes glittered. "You do now. Best leave, boy. Leave while you can." I didn't. I was too fascinated, too stupid. Night came again. I stayed in the cabin, listening. The hollow pulsed with life, and then I heard them. Footsteps in the snow outside, slow, dragging. I looked out the window. A figure moved among the trees, hunched and loping like a wounded animal. Its face was hidden beneath a tangle of hair, and something shiny clutched in its hand. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't move. The figure came to my door. I could hear it breathing, ragged and wet. Then it stopped. The handle turned. I woke the next morning lying on the floor. The door was closed, but the faint scent of blood lingered. The jars in the shack, they were now on my kitchen table, as if they had followed me home. Panic consumed me. I packed my car and drove down the winding roads, desperate for the safety of civilization. But the roads curved back, the hills looping in impossible ways. Every turn brought me closer to the cabin. It was as if the hollow itself had shifted to keep me inside. I tried to sleep in the car. The wind carried whispers again, soft and insistent. I thought I heard my own voice answering them, though I hadn't spoken. The snow began to fall, though the forecast had promised clear skies. Snow in November, thick and wet, blanketing the hills in white silence. The headlights caught movement, shadows darting behind trees, crouching shapes that vanished when I looked directly. Eventually, the car stalled. I stepped out, heart thudding, into the heavy snow. The cabin was there, impossibly close, though I had driven for hours. Its door swung open slowly. Inside, the jars glowed faintly, the pale things inside shifting like they were awake. And on the table, a full body, stitched together from bits that didn't belong, eyes blinking in terror. I backed away, tripping, falling into the snow. When I looked up, dozens of figures surrounded me, emerging from the hollow. Children, adults, faces twisted with something inhuman. Their eyes gleamed wetly in the dim light. They didn't speak, they only watched. One stepped forward, holding something familiar, a small, pale hand, not unlike the one I'd seen before. My own hand, severed cleanly at the wrist, held out in invitation. I screamed, but the hollow swallowed it. Time lost meaning. I wandered blindly, the snow crunching underfoot, the whispering hollow pressing in from all sides. The figures followed, always just at the edge of vision. Every cabin I passed had jars. Every tree hid watching eyes. Even the sun seemed wrong, pale and sickly, as if the world itself had been stitched together from nightmares. I tried leaving, but I always returned. The hollow would not let me go. Some nights I would awake and find myself back at the shack, staring at the table, unable to look away. The jars pulsed like hearts. The pale things inside writhed when I blinked. The symbol on the hand glowed faintly, humming like an invocation. The locals never mentioned me by name, but they would glance toward the rise with careful eyes. They whispered of the Hollow Keeper, of those who wandered too deep and were claimed. I was one of them. Not yet gone entirely, but not fully alive. Sometimes I hear new voices, soft and trembling, coming from the cabin. People who think it's safe to explore, who think the hills are quiet. I watch them from the tree line. They do not see me, but I see them. I hear them. And I know what the hollow wants. It wants everything. And I can't stop it. The snow comes early now. The wind whispers in the hollers. Every now and then a traveler disappears, vanishes without a trace. Some find their way back, but not whole. Their eyes tell the story the locals will never say aloud. The hollow waits, patient and eternal, always hungry. I should be dead. I should be free. But the hollow remembers me. It will not let me leave. Every day I wander its frozen corridors, every night I listen to its whispers, and sometimes, just sometimes, I see movement in the jars, something that looks like me, trapped, suspended, alive, but not. I do not touch them, I cannot, but I am drawn to them, always. And I know one day I will be inside a jar too. Until then, I walk the hollow, its shadows my only companions. The trees sway, the wind moans, and the snow falls endlessly. The hollow keeper is patient, the hollow is patient, and I am waiting. Story the end. The mountains had been breathing that morning, fog coiling through the hollows like a living thing, a thick gray veil pressing against the dense, damp forest. The air smelled of wet pine and rotting leaves, and even the wind seemed cautious, whispering low and uneven, as if it were warning someone or something of an impending intrusion. A rusted Chevy pickup crawled along the gravel road that wound like a snake through the hills, its tires grinding the loose stones. Inside, Caleb McBride gripped the wheel tighter than necessary, knuckles pale beneath the sun-bleached skin. His cousin, Joni, sat beside him, knees tucked to her chest, face pressed to the cracked passenger window. Her breath fogged the glass, smearing tiny streaks of grime that the truck had gathered over years of neglect. Neither spoke. The silence was a living weight pressing between them. Caleb knew why he'd come back. He didn't want to, but he had to. There were things left unfinished, debts unpaid, names better left unspoken. The McBride property was tucked deep into the Appalachian woods, the kind of place where Google Maps failed, and even the county lines seemed hesitant to acknowledge its existence. Caleb hadn't been there since he was 12, and the memories that had been dormant for years surged up, sharp and bitter. The old cabin they'd grown up in had long since rotted into the earth, but the land remained, stubbornly alive with the secrets of generations. Caleb parked the truck near the remnants of a stone foundation, half swallowed by moss and wild ferns. He stepped out, the cold air biting his ankles through his boots. Joni followed reluctantly, her eyes darting to the trees as if expecting something to lunge out at them from the shadows. They started toward the hollow that the old family tales had always warned about, the place the locals called Raven's Hollow. The stories had always been dismissed as the ramblings of backwoods superstition. But as Caleb and Joni crested the ridge overlooking the hollow, he felt the shift. The air changed, denser, heavier, clinging to their skin. The fog swirled unnaturally, forming shapes that seemed to watch them, to whisper just out of comprehension. The trees leaned inward, their gnarled limbs like fingers, pointing, accusing. They entered the hollow cautiously. The forest floor was a mosaic of broken branches, scattered bones, and the occasional rusted artifact that seemed impossibly old. Caleb's boots crunched on something that wasn't quite wood. He bent down, prying at the soil, and unearthed a small, charred doll, its face melted and unrecognizable. He shuddered. This was no ordinary abandoned place. There had been rituals here, dark ones, performed with deliberate care. "Caleb," Joni's voice trembled. He looked down to see her staring at a shallow pit. Inside, remnants of what might once have been human bones were arranged in a grotesque pattern. Dried blood stained the soil like paint on a canvas, and at the edge of the pit, etched into a flat stone, was a symbol he knew from whispered childhood nightmares. A circle intersected with jagged lines, an eye drawn at the center. It was the mark his grandmother had warned him about, said to belong to the eyes in the hollow, creatures who watched, waited, and demanded tribute. Let's go back," Joni said, her voice breaking. But Caleb couldn't. He felt compelled, pulled toward the pit by something that was part memory, part curse. He knelt, brushing soil from the symbols, revealing smaller carvings, tiny, crude representations of people, animals, and faces twisted in silent screams. The air grew colder, their breath steaming in front of them, yet the fog thickened, swallowing the edges of the clearing. Then they heard it. A low, rasping sound like someone dragging a chain across wet stone. It was distant at first, then closer, circling the hollow. Caleb's heart hammered in his chest. He turned to Joni, but she had already dropped to her knees, sobbing. The sound came again, and he realized it wasn't the wind. It was deliberate, patient, watching, waiting. Suddenly, shadows moved among the trees, quick and unnatural. Something crouched low, impossibly thin, limbs too long, and fingers tipped with dirt-caked nails. Its head lolled, tilting unnaturally, and when it spoke, it wasn't in words. It was a sound, a rasping, wet, incomprehensible noise that felt like it reached into their minds. Caleb dropped to the ground, covering his ears. Joni screamed, but the sound didn't stop her, didn't stop either of them. It was as if the hollow itself was alive, shaping fear into a tangible, suffocating presence. Caleb scrambled backward, grabbing Joni's hand. Together, they stumbled over roots and fallen logs, crashing through the thick underbrush. But the hollow had changed. The trees no longer led them out. They had shifted, rearranged, blocking the paths they knew. Fog turned to misty tendrils, wrapping around their ankles, pulling them down. Caleb realized with dawning horror that the forest didn't want them to leave. They broke through a thicket, only to find themselves at the edge of a cliff. Below, the river glinted darkly, its waters slow and treacherous, and standing there at the edge was another figure. Unlike the shadows before, this one seemed human, or at least it had the semblance of it. A tall man, dressed in tattered overalls, skin pale and mottled as though eaten by rot. His eyes were deep, black hollows, reflecting nothing. He raised a hand, slow, deliberate, and Caleb froze. The air stank of decay, of old smoke and iron. "You shouldn't have come back," the figure rasped, voice like gravel rolling down a hill. "Blood calls blood. Debt calls debt," Joni whimpered. Who are you?" "Your kin and theirs," he said, gesturing vaguely to the trees. "All who walk these hills, all who turn their eyes away. They wait for tribute. They wait for reckoning." Caleb felt bile rise in his throat. He had heard the tales, the whispers about his family, how the McBrides had always been different, keepers of secrets the mountains demanded, but he had thought them myths. Now he knew they were warning signs. The hollow didn't forgive. The hollow didn't forget. The figure advanced, but not quickly. It glided, unnaturally smooth. Caleb noticed the ground beneath it seemed dead, vegetation wilting, life fleeing. He grabbed Joni, searching desperately for another way. But the cliff offered nothing, the river far below too dangerous to risk. "Please," Caleb shouted, voice cracking. "We didn't know." "Knowing doesn't matter," the figure said, its mouth twisted into a grimace, or what passed for one. "The dead is older than you. The hollow remembers, it sees all." The fog thickened to the point they could barely see each other. From within it, more shapes emerged, forms of animals, twisted versions of creatures they knew. A deer with hollow eyes and ribs protruding, a fox with teeth too long, limbs bent the wrong way. They moved in silence, surrounding Caleb and Joni. Caleb felt Joni's grip tighten on his arm, nails cutting into his skin. He remembered the stories his grandmother had whispered late at night, about offerings, about bloodlines, about promises made and broken. The hollow didn't care for innocence, it cared for balance. It demanded restitution. Caleb and Joni were late, far too late. The tall figure reached them, looming above, and Caleb felt a coldness that wasn't air, but a presence, something that seeped into his bones. He tried to run, but his legs wouldn't move. Joni screamed, a sound swallowed instantly by the oppressive fog. "Please, anything." Caleb gasped, tears freezing on his face. "You can give them only what is yours," the figure said, its voice now layered with echoes like many voices speaking at once, all suffering. "And that is not enough." The world shifted. Caleb fell, or perhaps was pushed. He could not tell. He landed in a shallow hollow, mud and water swallowing him. Joni's hand slipped from his, lost to the fog. He scrambled, desperate, calling her name. But the hollow answered only with whispers, low and persistent. Then he saw it. The pit from earlier, now wider, deeper, filled with writhing shapes that were vaguely human, faces pressed to the sides, eyes wide in silent horror. They were chanting, or perhaps it was Caleb imagining it, but the rhythm was hypnotic, impossible to resist. Something pulled at him, drawing him closer, and as he neared the edge, a shape rose from the pit. A child, familiar and wrong. Its eyes were his own, reflecting terror and rage, yet it smiled. "You came back," the child said, voice a rasp that scraped across his soul. "You came back, and now you stay." Caleb tried to back away, but the ground gave way beneath him. He fell into the pit, the mud and shapes closing around him, suffocating, crushing, dragging him down. Above, the fog swirled, and the last thing he heard was Joni screaming, her voice twisted, overlapping with countless others, becoming part of the hollow's eternal chorus. Somewhere, far above, the tall figure watched, patient, as the forest settled again. The fog thinned slightly, leaving only the hollow, silent once more, waiting for the next who dared to return. The McBride cabin remained gone. The forest reclaimed what man had touched. The land was quiet. But if you listened closely, if you dared to wander too deep into Raven's Hollow, you could hear it. The whispers, the rustling, the low, rasping voice that promised, blood calls blood, debt calls debt, and the hollow always collects. Time passed, as it always does in the mountains. Locals avoided the area, speaking in hushed tones about the missing. Hunters reported strange shapes in the fog. And the few who ventured too close often returned changed, silent, haunted, eyes wide as if seeing something no living being should. Caleb and Joni were never seen again. But sometimes after heavy rains, travelers claimed they saw a Chevy pickup, old and rusted, parked at the edge of a ridge, fog curling around it like smoke. And if you approached, you could swear you heard faint cries, a child's voice calling for help, or perhaps warning you to turn back. The hollow never forgot, the hollow never forgave, and in the mountains of Appalachia, that was enough. Story the end. The chill came first. It slithered through the fingers of wind, dancing between the bare branches of the Appalachian forest. Somewhere deep in the holler, where the road carved its narrow way beneath the ridges and the wild still claimed its dominion, the woods had a pulse, a slow, living heartbeat that told its own story of things better left unspoken. I arrived by old truck, tires crunching gravel as the sun dipped low behind the ridgeline, painting the sky with bruised purples and half-fading golds. My destination was the place my grandpa had once owned, or so the deed declared. The house sat right where a side road forked off the main state highway, the gravel turning to dirt, the path narrowing until the forest seemed to lean in from all sides. As I parked and stepped down into that hush, the holler breathed around me. Cicadas in final throes, the wind sighing through hollows, a quiet so complete it threatened to wake up the shadows. The house looked older than its paperwork, weather-worn wood siding, sections sagging, windows dim-eyed and watching. I shifted my duffel and pushed open the door. Hinges groaned. The smell of dampness and pine mold greeted me. I hadn't been here since I was a kid, maybe 10 or 11, and memory unspooled in half-empty echoes of summers spent chasing fireflies, fishing the small creek below, hearing Grandpa tell stories about hollows and miners, ghosts of coal and earth. He died when I was 16, leaving the property, it seemed, for me to figure out what to do with. Now, I figured I'd come out, see if it made sense to fix the place up. A getaway, maybe. A respite from city hustle. I hauled in gear. Tarp, chainsaw, some food, water, basics. The sun sank, and dusk pooled through the trees. I started by lighting the stove in the old kitchen, shaking out thick cloud of dust. The windows rattled as the wind picked up, and I realized the house didn't just sit in the forest. It belonged to it. I slept poorly. Somewhere outside there were pangs. Wood breaking, a low moan perhaps, but I told myself it was just the woods settling. Morning came cold, dew thick on the grass, the holler bright with new light. I wandered out, coffee warming my hands, and looked beyond the ridgeline. Old mining equipment, rusted tracks, a collapsed mine portal half hidden by brush. Grandpa never liked us messing near the old pit. He said the land held its own memories, sometimes its own hunger. The first real sign was the footprints. I found them behind the house, in the soft dirt by the creek bank, large, barefoot prints. They led from the woods, around the rear of the house, and back into the woods again. The toes were long, digits splayed. They weren't human, I thought. Too wide. Too deliberate. My skin crawled, but I shrugged and told myself maybe it was a bear or boar. I chipped at that rational thinking fast. By the third evening, the woods felt alive in a way that road maps and city streets couldn't know. The wind carried the scent of something old, earth, decay, rusted metal. In the middle of the night, I heard a voice, straight, clear, as if someone spoke from just outside the bedroom window. Go back! I froze, my heart pounding so loud I thought it might echo off the walls. I didn't answer. I pulled the covers over my head. The wind stopped abruptly. Silence pressed in. Daylight didn't make it better. At breakfast, I found one of the kitchen knives missing. I remembered leaving it on the counter. I searched, but no trace. Later, I found it outside, stuck into the rotten fence post at the edge of the yard, blade pointing inward like a grim invitation. Shaken, I picked it up, shoved it in the gear bag, and told myself I'd leave in the morning if needed. But I stayed. One more day. The forest pulled me deeper. It was as I explored the old mine portal that the real terror began. The portal, now collapsed halfway, the wood supports charred and splintered, looked like a mouth gaping into Earth's dark throat. I felt drawn to it. Something about it was wrong. I mapped the rusty tracks to a point where the ground had caved in. I peered in, blackness. I couldn't see the bottom. A draft of cold air spilled outward, like the mine exhaled something heavy, ancient. I took a photo, decided to mark the area as hazardous. On my way back, I caught sight of something in the trees. A figure, crouched, watching. I froze. It stood tall, slender limbs, bare feet, pale skin blending with bark. Then it melted backward into shadows like smoke. My breath caught. I ran the rest of the way back. That night, I heard scratching at the windows. Soft. I got up, crept to the window, looked out into black. At first I saw nothing. Then I noticed eyes, a pair of pale eyes reflecting moonlight, watching. They were too wide apart to be human. The head tilted, studious, curious. I backed away. The sound shut off. The wind picked up again, rattled the windows. I lay in bed, light on, torch by my side. I tried to sleep, but dreams came heavy. I dreamt the house shifting, the woods reaching inside, branches sliding across the floor. I dreamt voices, soft, sibilant, whispering from the walls. Outside, come outside. I woke sweating. I looked at the clock, 3:17 a.m. The wind quit, everything quiet. And in that quiet I heard footsteps on the porch, slow, deliberate. I shivered, held still. The door creaked open slowly, soft thuds. I whispered a curse, then nothing. I didn't peek. Morning. I decided I'd leave today or at least call some help. I drove to the nearest town, Oak Ridge, Tennessee, or what passes for it, stretch of small-town storefronts and church steeples. In the diner, I mentioned the old mine and the footprints. The waitress, older lady with lines like coal seam cracks in her face, leaned in, lowered her voice. "You saw the old mine," she said. "And the prints. You need to leave. Fast." I asked why. She said, "Folks used to disappear around there. The mine, there was a collapse back in the 50s. Men died. They tried to pull them out, then some just vanished. All they found, marks, prints, shadows that weren't human." She took coffee from her mouth. "Them hills don't forget." I thanked her, paid, and left. Back at the house, the air felt thicker. The forest scent richer, heavier. I unpacked things, charger, gear, decided I'd go at sundown. I cleaned up, locked the door, prepared a bag. As dusk fell, though, the restless feeling returned. I heard humming, not far, a melody, broken, childlike, singing, "Come see, come see." It came from the forest's edge. I gripped my flashlight and walked down the path. The singing faded. I called out, "Hello?" No answer. Then a hand reaching out from the foliage, pale, long fingers. The singing stopped. I jumped back. The hand pulled away. I pointed the flashlight into the dark. A figure stood, thin, gaunt, too tall. Pale skin, hair limp, tangled branches in it. Eyes full of emptiness. It tilted its head quietly. No mouth moved. I ran. I made it back to the house, locked door behind me, heart hammering. I stayed awake until dawn, chainsaw idling in case I needed a distraction. But I knew I couldn't stay another night. In the morning, I got in the truck and started driving away. Gravel crunch, the forest shifting off my windows. I glanced in the mirror at the house, and by the time I blinked, I thought I saw someone standing at the window, watching. But the screen's glare made it uncertain. I drove on. Halfway down the side road, I stopped. The truck sputtered, engine frozen. I got out, hood up, realized fuel gauge showed nothing, though tank was half full when I left. I walked back to the ditch. That's when I heard the drumming. At first faint, then louder. Thump, thump, deep like a submerged heart or a root pulsing underground. I looked into the woods on both sides. Trees moved no wind. Branches creaked. The drumming replaced the wind. Then I saw them. Dozens of figures stepping out from the tree line. Pale, tall, silent. Some barefoot, some in torn clothes that might have been miners' overalls, caked with coal dust still. Their eyes blank, their limbs too long. They advanced. I froze. The drumming got faster. The ground seemed to sag beneath me. Then one reached forward, held out a hand that gleamed. I looked close. Nails blackened, skin full of old mud, and between the fingers something thin and elongated. I looked away. I heard whispers now, a chorus of voices, soft, hissing. "Stay. Stay with us. We never leave." My breath stuttered. I backed away. I felt the earth shift under my feet. Roots cracked. The road shuddered. I turned and ran back to the truck. I rammed the key in the ignition. Nothing. The figures circled the truck. I slammed doors closed, locked them. The window rattled. A face pressed against the glass. Pale lips parted. No words, just breath. I remembered the chainsaw in the bed of the truck. I hauled myself out, grabbed it, pulled the starter rope. It roared awake. The figures recoiled. Drumming stopped. Silence. The forest paused. In the stillness, I heard clicking, like jaws opening in the trees. The figures backed into the shadows, but they didn't disappear completely. They stood just beyond the light. I gunned the engine. The truck lurched, tires spinning, gravel spraying. I reversed fast, then forward. I hit the pavement again, dusting them behind. I looked rear view. The truck's light caught them one last time. They stood at the forest's edge, silent, watching. I gripped the steering wheel hard. The engine roared down the hill onto the highway. Trees receded. I cleared the holler. I didn't stop until I reached the city. I found a motel, locked the door behind me, drew curtains, watched the trees outside sway, though it was late and there shouldn't have been anything. Sleep came heavy. In my dreams, I saw the figures at the window, pressed faces to glass. I woke in a sweat. The next morning, I called up a realtor and listed the property, said I wanted nothing more to do with it. Weeks passed. I thought maybe that was the end. Then I got the first letter. The envelope was thick, heavy card, no return address. Inside a photograph, the old house, taken at dusk, the porch light on. Beneath, scrawled in black, "We are waiting." My heart sank. I recognized the footprints still faint in the dirt. I recognized the drumming under soil. I recognized the hunger in those hollow eyes. I didn't sleep well anymore. Every rustle in the trees, I felt it watching. I wondered whether leaving had changed anything. Maybe the holler followed me. The forest had roots in me now. Months later, on a business trip, I returned home late. My phone lit up with a message, a live video. Terrible, grainy. A shape in the darkness standing just at tree line in my city yard, far away from mountains. Pale figure, limbs too long, staring at camera. It took a step forward darkly, and then the screen went black. No one believed me. They told me I was stressed, that maybe the woods messed with my mind. But I knew. I saw what I saw. And I knew the holler didn't release what it claimed. The old mine cried for company. The ridge waited for footsteps. The trees bled the quiet in nights and whispered names. Years later, I returned once, a foolish visit. Walked onto the porch of the house again. The door sagged open. Inside, the knife I left on the fence post lay on the hearth. The mine portal had collapsed deeper, tracks untracked, the forest rebuilt, and the footprints returned, fresh in the dust at the back door. I stepped outside. The drumming began again. Thump, thump. I saw a hand reach from the woods. I fled. Now I live in a city apartment. Lights always on. At night, I hear a soft tapping at my window, long fingers tracing the glass, a face in the black, pale eyes, no words necessary. I know what it means. We never leave. We follow. And the holler waits. Story the end. The first time I saw the cabin, it wasn't really a cabin at all. It was a shape in the trees, a warped silhouette that seemed to breathe with the wind. The sun had already sunk behind the ridges, and the forest was swallowing the last light. I'd been hiking alone for hours, the trail narrowing into nothing but twisted roots and mud. The smell hit me first, a mixture of rot, damp earth, and something else I couldn't name. And then I heard it, faint, scratching, like claws on wood, coming from the shape in the trees. I should have turned back. My gut screamed it. But I was exhausted, and the storm rolling in made me desperate for any shelter. The trees parted, revealing the cabin properly, a crooked thing that leaned to one side like it had given up fighting gravity decades ago. The boards were gray, splintered, warped. Windows were missing panes, or maybe they were boarded up with mismatched wood. The door hung from one hinge and creaked with the wind. Inside, the smell was worse, damp, musty, with the sharp tang of decay. A thin layer of dust covered the floorboards, except for tracks, small, clawed prints that ran from the corner near the fireplace to the back of the room. I froze, heart hammering. I told myself it was just raccoons or a stray dog. I told myself that over and over as I set my pack down and searched for firewood. I found a bundle of old newspapers stacked in the corner. The headlines were from the 1980s and 90s, but the photos made my stomach twist. Faces were scratched out, names written over in what looked like blood. I dropped them. The sound echoed too loudly in the empty cabin, and somewhere outside I thought I heard a low chuckle. I decided to stay the night. The storm came on fast, a torrential rain that pounded the roof like someone beating drums. I wrapped myself in my sleeping bag, trying to ignore the scratching that had started again, closer now, moving across the walls. The shadows shifted unnaturally, and I could swear I saw shapes bending behind the remaining panes of glass. At some point, I heard a whisper, so faint I could barely make it out. It said my name. Morning didn't bring relief. The forest outside was quiet, unnaturally so. Even the birds seemed to have vanished. I tried to leave, but the path had changed overnight. Roots and brambles blocked the trail I'd followed the day before, and the cabin seemed farther back in the forest than it had appeared. I told myself I was imagining things, that I'd gotten turned around in the dark. Then I saw it. A figure crouched in the clearing, staring at me. Thin, almost skeletal, its skin gray and hanging in folds. Its eyes were black pits, and it had fingers that ended in long, yellowed nails. It didn't move, just watched, tilting its head like a curious animal. I froze. It made no sound, but I could feel it studying me. My stomach turned, and I stumbled backward. The figure vanished behind a tree, almost too quick to be real. I didn't go back to the cabin. I moved through the forest as fast as I could, but something was wrong. Every ridge I thought I'd crossed, every stream I'd followed, led me back to the clearing. And in the clearing, there was always something waiting. More figures now, crouching in the shadows, thin and warped, their eyes reflecting the dim light. I started running blindly, falling over roots, scraping my hands and face on rocks and branches. I couldn't hear my own breathing over the pounding of my heart and the soft, wet clicks behind me like nails tapping on bone. By nightfall, I'd broken through what I thought was the outer edge of the forest. I could see the ridge of my town in the distance. Relief washed over me until I saw the first car. Its headlights were on, but no one was inside. The engine idled, and the doors were unlocked. Against my better judgment, I got in. That's when I saw the message scratched into the dashboard. You don't belong. My fingers trembled, and I slammed the door. The scratching sound started again, soft at first, then growing louder, moving all around me. I ran, the lights of the town beckoning like salvation. But when I reached the edge of the forest, the trees were gone. Instead, there was a low, gray fog stretching as far as I could see, and the ground beneath my feet was soft, damp, like the earth inside the cabin. I woke up in the cabin again. The newspapers were stacked neatly, faces scratched out, names overwritten in red. The figures were there, crouching, watching. And in the fireplace where there had been ashes before, something stirred, something thin, long-limbed, crawling out slowly, a wet, slithering sound filling the room. I tried to run. The door was gone. The windows were gone. Only the walls remained, breathing with the scratching, the whispering, the wet shuffling of countless claws. I could feel them pressing against me, bending time and space around the cabin until every attempt at escape brought me back to the same spot. The figures circled me, whispering in voices that weren't voices, their mouths moving impossibly wide. Days, maybe weeks passed. I don't know. Time lost meaning. I could see the sun through the broken windows, but it didn't change. The forest outside was endless, shifting, alive. The figures took turns approaching me, leaning over my shoulder, their breath rancid with something I couldn't identify. They whispered my name, but the words meant nothing, and yet I understood perfectly. Sometimes they brought things, bones, scraps of cloth, old coins. Every item had my name on it, carved or painted, always with that same dark red substance. I touched one once. It burned, and I could feel it seeping into my skin. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the cabin. The walls pulsed like they were breathing with me. I tried to fight back. I broke a chair over one of them once, and it only laughed, or at least that's what it sounded like. The laughter echoed in my skull, in every room of the cabin at once. They didn't die. They didn't bleed. They just moved differently, tilting their heads, studying me more closely. I stopped sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, the figures moved closer, whispering, scratching. Sometimes they held my own face in their hands, mimicking me, making expressions I hadn't made yet. My reflection in the broken windows was never right. My eyes were too black, too wide. My mouth moved when I wasn't speaking. Food appeared sometimes, dropped in corners. Sometimes it was raw, sometimes cooked. I don't know where it came from. I don't know if I ate it. Hunger passed into something else. Fear became constant, a living thing that wrapped around my ribcage. I could hear it breathing in the walls, in the floorboards, in the air I breathed. One day, or night, I cannot tell. The figures stopped. They crouched in the corners, perfectly still. The cabin was silent, except for the whispering wind through the cracks. I thought maybe they had left. Relief was short-lived. Then I heard it, a knock on the floorboards, slow, methodical. 1, 2, 3. I answered. No one was there, but the scratching started again. I began to notice something new. Shadows stretched differently, not tied to the light, but to the figures themselves. Sometimes they merged, forming one massive shadow that filled the room. Sometimes they split into dozens, each whispering, each watching, each clawing at the very air. I started talking to them, sometimes asking questions. Sometimes they answered. Not in words exactly, but I understood. Always the same. You don't belong. You never did. I lost the ability to remember my life outside the cabin. Names, faces, places. They slipped through my mind like sand. I remembered hunger, fear, scratching, the smell of rot, the whispering. That was all. That was enough. I tried leaving. Sometimes I walked through the front door and found myself in the clearing again. Sometimes the cabin moved. Sometimes it was deeper in the forest than it could possibly be. The trees seemed to twist to block my path. The figures always followed. They never touched me. They didn't need to. Presence alone was enough to bend my sanity, to make me doubt everything I thought I knew. Once I found a mirror. My reflection grinned at me, though I wasn't smiling. Its eyes were black pits, its mouth stretched far too wide. I touched the glass, and it rippled like water. My hands went through it. The mirror whispered my name. The figures laughed. I tried screaming. My voice came out wrong, layered with theirs. Screams overlapped, multiplied, until there was no distinction between me and them. The cabin pulsed with sound, with wet, sliding, scratching, whispering laughter. I stopped trying to escape. Now I sit. I watch the corners, the walls, the broken windows. The figures crouch, waiting. Sometimes I feel them brush against my skin when I'm alone. Sometimes I hear my own voice whispering in the corners. I am still here, always here, waiting, watching, listening, knowing that the forest outside is endless, that the cabin is endless, that the figures are endless, and that I never belong to the world I came from. World is gone. That world is irrelevant. And sometimes when the wind shifts, I think I can hear another hiker in the distance, another lost soul drawn to the clearing, drawn to the cabin, drawn to the whispers. They will come, and when they do, the scratching will begin again, soft at first, then growing louder, until the cabin remembers them, and the figures watch, and the forest waits, patient and hungry. Story the end. The old pickup rolled to a stop at the crest of a ridge where the road narrowed nearly to a single rutted lane, and the ancient rhododendron branches dipped toward the windshield like the gnarled fingers of some restless thing. I didn't ask him to pick me up. I could have gotten another ride, but I waited. I carried my pack and a sense I might be heading into something that didn't want witnesses. His name was Burl. He'd lived here his whole life, or that's what he claimed. Anyway, the county lines, the hollows between ridge and ridge, the dense forest of the southern Appalachian Mountains, they were more than a landscape. They were an inheritance, a burden, a silence that roared. I pulled my pack from the back of his rusted Chevrolet pickup, its bed scratched and scarred, then stepped down, boots crunching dry leaves and broken twigs. We stood a moment at that narrow ridge, the wind whispering far below through leafless trees. A coyote yipped. A single crow cawed. Shadows cast by the setting sun stretched long and twisted across the land. There was something in the air, an unspoken warning. I shouldn't have taken the job. I'd come to document old mining towns, places forgotten by time. I liked the idea of traipsing through abandoned buildings, hearing the echoes of lives long gone. But the moment I set foot in this valley, something changed. The stories I'd read about disappearances, about the old Appalachian malice, felt less like folklore and more like warnings. Burl parked beside a small, crooked cabin that rested atop a slight rise above the creek. The creek's water gurgled, though more sound than sight. Nightfall made it hard to see more than shadows. The cabin was made of hewn logs, mossed and sagging, roof shingles missing. 1,000 years of rot seemed to press down on its walls. And from somewhere inside came the faint scrape of wood, an old door settling, or something else. "You'll stay in here," Burl said, his voice low and gravelly like river stones shifting underwater. He flipped a small lantern on the front porch. Its pale yellow light shook in the dusk. "Don't mind the creek. It might wake you." He didn't smile, just turned and walked back to his truck. I watched him drive off down the single lane, its edges crumbled and vanish around a curve. I had a feeling I was on my own now, the kind of alone that wasn't new to me. But this felt different. The porch groaned as I set my pack on the wooden floor. I surveyed the cabin, a single room inside, an iron stove in one corner, a table, a bed with a thin mattress. The floorboards sagged, the smell of damp old wood, of mold and something older, like a long unwashed memory. I lit the lantern and set it on the table. Through the windows, I saw the forest swirling in dusk. The wind moved the trees against each other in a spaced rhythm that sounded almost deliberate, like quiet footsteps far off. I pulled out my notebook and camera, then wandered around the cabin. On a shelf, I found a box of old photographs, sepia prints of people with stern faces, little smiles, children holding toys, father and mother and siblings. They wore clothes of an older time. On the back of one, I read, Heart Hollow, 1932. I made a note. Heart Hollow. I'd heard that name. Locals whispered it when I asked about ghost towns. They said it was gone now. Abandoned, swallowed by the forest. But here stood these pictures in this cabin as if someone preserved them. I noticed the fireplace. No soot. The stove. No ash. This place hadn't been lived in for decades. Yet the lamp worked, and the photographs sat boxed as if someone had just placed them there. I decided to head out for a walk before dark finished its slide. I strapped on my pack again and followed a small game trail that led down toward the creek. The water came into clearer view now. It was fast and cold, and the banks were steep with tangled roots. I crossed at a fallen trunk and climbed the opposite side. The forest felt alive in an unnatural way, the silence heavy, the rustle of leaves too crisp. As I walked, I felt watched. Not an animal, but something. I turned sharply, scanned the trees. Nothing. I moved on. Then I heard the scream. It was far down the hollow, carried on the wind, a high-pitched, desperate cry, like a child's voice, but twisted. I froze, my heart hammered. The scream stopped, silence re-arrived. I waited, listening. Only the creek and the forest breathing. I considered turning back to the cabin, but felt compelled to follow the trail. I could back out tomorrow. But not now. Whatever was happening here, I wanted to record it. The trail came to an old mine shaft. I almost didn't see it. Hollowed out and blocked with decaying timbers and rusted rails. A sign hung at an angle. Heart Hollow Coal Company, mine number 4. The lettering was almost erased, the wood blackened and rotting. I set up my camera, shot a few photos. The air here smelled of rot and steel and water. I crouched by the mine opening, shining my flashlight into the blackness. The beam disappeared into the dark. It felt deep, sucking. I could hear a faint drip. What, also something like breathing or shifting weight? Behind me, I heard the twig snap. I jerked my head around. Nothing. I exhaled slowly and backed away. I tried to convince myself it was the wind. I made my way back to the cabin, faster now. The forest seemed to reel around me, the trail less defined. When I reached the porch, I turned. The mine entrance was hidden behind darkness. I closed the door of the cabin, secured the latch. Inside, the lantern glowed. I sat at the table and reviewed my photos on the small screen of the camera. The mine shaft, the trail, the hollow. One photo had something odd. A figure standing just inside the mine entrance. Shadowy, obscure. I zoomed in. The shape was tall, thin, something human but stretched. Arms long. I hadn't seen anyone there. My hair crept at my neck. I knocked against the table with my elbow, chased away the image from the screen. The lantern flickered. I lay down on the bed, pulled the blanket over, but I couldn't sleep. The wind moaned outside. At some hour, I heard a creak, footsteps on the porch. I held still, heart pounding. No lantern outside. I felt foolish. Maybe a raccoon or the porch settling. I closed my eyes. A low whisper reached my ears, a voice I couldn't quite make out. I sat up. The lantern on the table trembled. The rope holding the shade twisted slowly. Cold sweat coated my limbs. I flicked off the lantern and sat in darkness. The silhouette of the window frames pressed into darkness outside. The whisper returned, elongated, unearthly. It sounded like someone saying, "Come down." I shivered, snatched my camera. I clicked the flashlight on, beam sweeping the room. Nothing. Then outside the one window I saw a face, just for a moment, a pale, gaunt face pressed against the glass, eyes bright. I gasped. The face vanished. I dropped the camera. The lantern flickered back on by itself. The door slammed open. I jumped off the bed, grabbed my pack, and moved to the door. Outside was nothing but wind and tree shadows. No footprints in the mud, no animal. But I saw two impressions on the wooden porch floor, thin, long, like someone had stepped there in bare feet but standing unreal. I took a step back, breath loud. Then I saw branches brushing the lantern, someone or something moving through the shrubs. My legs locked. The thing crouched near the lantern, holding it. A gaunt figure, shadow tall, body extending weirdly. It let the lantern drop, and it clattered. The figure moved away, deeper into the woods. I grabbed the lantern and my pack and ran. The drive lane seemed endless. The woods pressed in. Trees bent overhead, knocked against each other as I scrambled down slope. I didn't look back. I kept hearing soft footfalls. I didn't stop until I reached the road. Then I saw the pickup, hazard lights flashing. Burl stood beside it. Relief hit me so hard I stumbled. "Hop in," he said, no question. I got in. The engine started. We rolled down the mountain. The cabin receded into darkness. The woods seemed to sigh as we passed. "What the hell was that?" I asked. He didn't answer for a while. Then he looked at me. "You saw something," he said quietly. "That means you know." "What do I know?" I asked, voice high. "That this valley ain't empty. Not really. Not ever. People come, go." He frowned at the road ahead. I watched the crests and hollows pass under the headlights. The forest seemed alive. Then Burl spoke again. "They call them the long ones, old as the ridges. They wait in hollows where men dug too deep, tore the mountain. The mountain gave them up, left a scar, and now something fills it." "What do you mean long ones?" I asked. He said, "Things that don't sleep like us, don't rest like we do. They watch the miners, their bones, the ones who never came up, their loss left a space." He exhaled hard. "This valley, it remembers. And what remembers sometimes comes calling." We reached the town. Lights shinier. Storefronts. People. I jumped out of the truck before he pulled up to his house. "I'm leaving tomorrow morning," I told him. "I don't care if I'm under contract. I'm leaving now," he nodded. "You best." That night, in a motel, I reviewed my photos again. The one of the cabin porch, the one of the figure at the entrance of the mine, and one more, taken without me realizing. The camera captured the inside of the mine. Far down the shaft, a pair of glowing eyes and a shape too tall, too thin, long arms reaching up as though trying to climb. I froze. My chest tightened. The picture blurred, but I zoomed. The figure was unambiguously there. I dropped the camera and turned away. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "We're watching." My fingers shook as I scrolled. I didn't reply. Morning came. I packed quickly. I left the valley. The mountains receded in the rearview mirror. But the memory didn't recede. It pressed. Weeks later, back in the city, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the apartment sounded like the porch floor. Shadows at the window looked like the forest. I kept thinking I heard scraping at the door. I checked the woods on Google Earth. The cabin gone, its site buried under brush. The road looked impassable. No pickup truck driving up the ridge. I had pictures, yes, but no one believed me. Then I started getting calls at midnight from a blocked number. Heavy breathing. After I hung up, I'd hear a knock at my door. Soft. At my window. Nothing when I opened. But the next day the prints were there on the glass. Thin, elongated. Human-like, but wrong. Too narrow, too tall. I moved apartments, changed cities, but the feeling followed. Then I got a recorded message. Crackling static, and I swear I heard the whisper again. "Come down." I did some digging. The company that ran mine number 4 shut down after an accident in 1934. Several miners missing, declared dead after the collapse. No bodies retrieved. The town evacuated. The hollow basically abandoned. I found a footnote. Local legend said the miners heard tapping in the walls before the collapse. One miner reported a huge long shadow crawling into the shaft. The company dismissed it. It was logged as structural failure. Months passed. I tried to resume normal life. But dreams came. I would wake at 3 a.m. to the sound of water flowing down a hogback ridge. I would wander into the forest of my dreams, and there, at the mouth of a shaft, the long waited. One afternoon I got an email from Burl. I thought he died or vanished. The email, no subject. Attached, one photo. The photo, the cabin porch but taken from farther away, moonlit. Standing by the door, a figure tall and gaunt, arms dangling. I zoomed in, the face blurry, but those glowing eyes. Tag on the photo says, "Your turn." My breath caught. I shut the computer. I called Burl. Number disconnected. I tried to locate him. Nothing. Then, at dusk, the power in my apartment cut out. I was on the balcony. looking down at distant streetlights. The trees, planted in lines along the sidewalk, whispered. The wind picked up. I saw something in my peripheral vision, an impossibly tall shadow leaning against the adjacent building. I blinked. It was gone. Inside, I found the front door unlocked. My camera bag was missing. The lamp by my bed tipped over. On the floor, the last photo I took in the valley, the mine entrance with the figure. But now someone had written on the margin, "Next time you'll be closer." I don't know what I am anymore. I think I brought something back with me from that hollow. A part of the valley followed. I can't outrun it. I can't hide. At night, I sleep with the lights on. My phone is always nearby, and I carry the old photographs with me. They wait. Last week, I found a new photo in the box, taken from inside my apartment window. Tilted angle, a tall figure standing in the hallway, backlit, unclear, but unmistakable arms too long, fingers too many. I sent it to a friend. He called, "This looks fake." I didn't respond. I told him I was done. I couldn't finish the project. The valley took more than footage. It demanded vigilance. Tonight I heard a knock. 3 slow taps on my door. I went to the peephole. Blackness. Then I heard the voice, low, crackling. "Come down." I didn't open. I'm writing this because maybe someone else should know. Maybe someone else will hear the forest sigh across the ridges and feel the pull. The hollows are deep. The shafts are dark. The long ones wait. And if you ever drive a narrow ridge road in the southern Appalachians, if you stay by a falling down cabin, if you tread past a sealed mine shaft, listen, because the wind is whispering, telling you to come down, to join. Story the end. Teeth in the fading light, shadows spilling across the valleys and cutting her path into long, twisting corridors of darkness. She'd spent summers here as a kid, but coming back now after 12 years in the city, the woods felt different. Thicker, almost alive. She told herself it was just nostalgia twisting into fear, but the air was heavy, tinged with that sharp metallic scent of wet earth and decay. Her grandmother's house sat atop a hill, stubborn and weathered, white paint flaking like peeling bark. The porch sagged in the middle, and the wind whistled through gaps in the walls. Lila's keys rattled as she unlocked the door. Inside, the smell of mothballs and old wood hit her like a fist. Dust floated in the streams of light from the high windows. She set her bags down, calling out, "Grandma?" "I'm here." Her voice seemed to vanish into the walls. Grandma June had been gone for 3 days, Lila remembered. The neighbors said she'd wandered off during the early morning fog, chasing after her chickens, or maybe just wandering the woods like she did when she got forgetful. Lila's father had called her, voice tight with worry, insisting she come home immediately. She'd driven all afternoon, cursing herself for ever thinking she could escape the mountain's pull. The first night was restless. Lila couldn't sleep, listening to the wind scrape along the roof like fingernails, the trees tapping against the windows. Somewhere outside, she thought she heard whispers, but each time she went to the door, there was nothing. Only the dark, the mist settling over the valley like a gray blanket, and the distant, eerie hoot of an owl, or was it laughter? The next morning, she ventured into the woods behind the house. The trail was barely there, a faint dirt path twisting between gnarled roots and moss-covered stones. Birds pecked at the undergrowth, startled by her intrusion. She carried a flashlight, though the sun was still climbing. Halfway through, she stumbled across something that froze her blood. A circle of rocks, meticulously arranged, encasing a patch of dirt. In the center, something small and shriveled lay. An animal, maybe, or what was left of one. Its fur was matted, eyes hollow. Her stomach churned. She'd heard stories of the old folk around here, of curses and rituals whispered over generations, but she had always laughed them off as local superstition. Now, standing in the heart of the woods, she understood why the stories never left anyone who grew up here. There was a weight to this land, something ancient that looked at you and measured you. She went back to the house, heart hammering, trying to shake the image from her mind. That night, she thought she heard the door creak open. She froze in bed, straining to listen. A voice hissed through the darkness, low and hoarse. "Lila." She bolted upright, the sheets tangled around her legs. Silence, just the wind, just the trees. By the second day, panic set in. She began searching the woods more rigorously, calling out for her grandmother. Every turn led her deeper into a maze of trees that seemed to rearrange themselves. Trails she thought she knew dissolved into thickets. She found more of those circles of rocks, sometimes with bones, sometimes with animal skulls, and always a faint lingering smell that made her gag. Every step forward seemed to echo with whispers she could almost make out. Names, warnings, pleas. She thought she saw shadows move just beyond the reach of her flashlight, figures hunched and crouched among the trees. On the third night, she awoke to scratching at the walls, low and deliberate. She pressed her ear to the wood. It wasn't wind. It was nails, claws, something sharp and wet scraping along the boards. She grabbed the kitchen knife and crept to the door. Outside, the fog was thick and crawling over the ground like a living thing. Shapes moved within it, blacker than the night, with eyes that reflected her flashlight beam like shards of glass. She ran back to the bed, trembling, and didn't sleep the rest of the night. The fourth day, she found the cabin of old Mr. Granger, a recluse who lived deep in the woods. She had remembered him from childhood, the one, they said, spoke to the mountains. His cabin was worse than her grandmother's house. Rotten logs, smoke curling from a chimney that had long been abandoned, and a yard littered with strange totems, twisted branches, feathers, small carved faces in stone. She called his name, but only silence answered. She stepped inside, and the smell of iron hit her immediately. On the table lay a ledger filled with lists of names, dates, and symbols she didn't recognize. On the last page, written in shaky script, "They are coming. We are not alone. Protect the circle." She looked up, and for the first time she felt eyes on her that weren't her own. The room was suddenly too small, the walls pressing in, and she ran, leaving the ledger behind. When she got back to the hill where her grandmother's house sat, it was deserted, doors swinging open in the wind. Then she saw them. Figures at the edge of the trees, thin and tall, faces hidden under hoods made of tattered cloth. They moved unnaturally, jerking and twisting as though they were puppets of the forest itself. She didn't know how long she ran. The sun dropped behind the mountains while she stumbled through roots and brambles. Eventually she found herself at the edge of a clearing, the mist thick around her ankles. And there, sitting on a stone slab, was her grandmother. Or what looked like her grandmother. Her skin was pale, lips gone, eyes sunken deep into her skull, and she muttered to herself in a voice that was hers and yet not hers, "They are hungry. They are coming." Lila screamed, backing away, but the figure didn't move. Then the figures emerged from the fog, circling her slowly. Each step they took made the ground tremble, and the whispering returned, louder, more insistent. Names. Mine. Hers. Others. The ledger's words came back. "Protect the circle." She realized the circles she had seen were protections, not traps. The animals, the bones, the stones, they were warnings, barriers. She had broken them. Desperation clawed at her. She grabbed a branch, swinging at the nearest figure, but it passed through like smoke. Panic propelled her forward, and she ran into the heart of the mountains, where the trees thickened and the fog choked her vision. The whispers became screams, voices overlapping, incoherent but maddening. Every step forward seemed to pull her back, the mountains themselves twisting, reshaping, keeping her inside. Hours passed, though it felt like days. She stumbled into a hollow, knees scraped, hands bleeding, and there, in the dim light of the moon piercing the canopy, she saw them. Dozens of figures, crouched, waiting, faces hidden, eyes glinting. And in the center, a pit dug deep into the earth, black and breathing like a wound. Inside, she glimpsed shapes writhing, too many to count, bodies broken and malformed, screaming without sound. Something cold touched her shoulder. She spun, knife raised, and found herself face to face with her grandmother. Her real grandmother this time, or the closest semblance left. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered, voice trembling. "The mountains take what they're owed." Lila tried to speak, but no sound came out. The figures moved closer, the circle tightening, and she realized there was no running anymore. The mountains weren't just land. They were sentient, ancient, and they demanded tribute. The last thing Lila saw before the pit swallowed her was her grandmother's eyes, wide with sorrow and fear, and then the shapes in the earth surged upward, tendrils of darkness wrapping around her. She screamed, a sound swallowed immediately by the mountain's hungry silence. When the sheriff arrived the next day, they found the house empty, the woods silent. No trace of Lila, no trace of Grandma June. Only the faintest circles of stones in the undergrowth, bones scattered here and there, and the ever-present whispering of the wind through the mountains, promising that it had taken what it wanted and it would call again. By nightfall, the mist had returned, rolling over the hills like a gray tide. Somewhere deep in the woods, voices whispered names that hadn't been spoken in decades. The mountains were patient. They remembered, and they were always hungry. Story the end.